Morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to each one of you to the day two of our PGDM inauguration batch 2022. I would request Mr. Rajesh Pillai, our CEO, to please take this forward. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. You can
Good
all
morning, sir.
say a good morning. Yeah, no
Good
problem.
morning,
Good
sir.
morning. Good morning,
Wonderful.
sir.
Morning,
Good
sir.
morning.
Yeah.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, sir.
Anybody feeling sleepy? Except for
Me,
Sanjeev, who's probably awake for us at 10, 20, it's almost 10:30 there in Washington. You
Probably
all
the
awake?
earliest I've woken up in 2020.
Really? Let's make it a habit.
Indeed.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great. Let me start by introducing Sanjeev Sahgal. Sanjeev joined the World Bank Group to set up its first HR shared services capacity before taking on his current role as the head of HR and HR strategy and agile HR. Sanjeev is a futurist and a strong advocate of bringing innovation in HR to technology and agile ways of working. He has worked in world's leading organizations such as Target, Lehman Brothers, GE, Genpact, and Motorola before joining the World Bank. And his diverse experience spans across human resources, operations, sales, and of course, something very close to me too, which is Six Sigma. I know, and yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board, Sanjeev. And thanks for being awake in Washington at this hour of the day for you. It's almost 10:30 p.m. In Washington, and he looks as fresh as rather he looks more fresh than most of us. So thanks for being here, Sanjeev. All over to you.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you for that very warm welcome. And my apologies if I have actually woken you up very early.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Somebody said,
yeah, of course. I'm sure
yeah,
the students are have to get back uh, to the real life again. The life has been pretty virtual for almost everyone for a very long period. I think
हम
we
अभी
need to
लेक्चर
get
ले
back to
रहे हैं ना
reality.
वॉशिंगटन में वहाँ पे 10:30 बज गए इसलिए 8 बजे का
बिल्कुल.
रखा
Hello.
तो सर
I,
उनको
I
बोल रहे
request
ना
students to unmute yourself, please.
यस
Or
मैम
mute yourself. You're unmute. Please mute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, so in fact, what I'm actually going to do, Rajesh, thank you so much for that very, very warm welcome. And I'm really delighted to be here. And I want to also thank Alpa. I think she's been coordinating with me and my office to kind of set up this conversation. But let me just put up my slides as I begin this conversation. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I want to actually begin by welcoming the students of the PGDM batch of 2020. I am sure all of you, when you were filling your applications, when you were preparing and you were dreaming of getting into your MBA or your college, you never imagined that your inauguration is going to be on Zoom. To be honest, I don't think that even I imagined that I'll be addressing a group of students in Mumbai, from Washington, DC. Not that the technology was not there, but, I never imagined that this day is really going to come. But let me begin with a small story. And I think you see, I put the date of March 11th, 2020. And the reason I just put this particular date is as a part of my role, I'm also responsible for what we call a business continuity. It is basically readiness of the organization to serve, its employees in case there's an eventuality. And of course, we were already hearing about the virus and the pandemic. So on March 11th, I was coordinating a business continuity event to try and see if all of HR people who are spread around the world working with the World Bank can work remotely from home. And we picked the date of 13th of March. We have about 400 people working in HR, supporting about 16,000 people who work at the World Bank. And we picked that particular date. Little did I know on 11th of March that when I go to test the working from home on 13th of March, I will possibly not come back it's almost like 5 months now, and maybe we're not going to go back for another 3 months. Honestly, I don't know when we are really going to go back. While of course the numbers are trending down, so that's the world that we actually live in, and there's a lot that is actually changing right now. But and before also I jump in, let me also really talk a little bit about the World Bank. I don't know how many of you are aware of the World Bank Group, but I'm just going to give you a very short introduction. So the World Bank Group is the world's largest development organization. So it's an institution that is focused on eradicating poverty and boosting shared prosperity. Those are the two goals of the organization. We are present. We have about roughly 189 members, and we are present in 130 countries. Our headquarters is in Washington, D.C. We have about 16,000 staff who work for the World Bank Group, and we have anywhere between 18 to 20,000 consultants who actually support us, who work part-time and temporarily. So that's a little bit of a brief. In my role, I like what Rajesh said, I head the HR strategy function, which supports the HR organization. In fact, what I intended to do in the next maybe about 20-25 minutes in this particular conversation, to really talk about what I'm experiencing, in my role, what we are seeing as part of the World Bank, and maybe also, share some of the other trends that, as a part of my role, I'm very curious about some of these things, and I love to kind of think about how the future of work is actually going to shape, as things progress. We've been talking about this whole VUCA. I don't know how many of you are aware of the acronym. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That's the word. And I remember almost like a decade back, this term became very popular with a lot of consulting companies coming and talking about, how to deal with a world that is getting more complex. But today we are actually experiencing it. This whole VUCA environment, and this possibly is one of the biggest pandemics or the biggest crisis the world has seen in a very, very long time. This crisis is putting us in uncharted territory. It's a major health crisis. It's an economic and a social disaster, and you're also seeing a lot of polarization in insecurity. So there are a whole lot of things that are actually impacting us. All around actually, and I think it's very difficult to kind of predict. Every time you open the app, I'm not going to say the newspaper because I've stopped reading the newspaper. Every time I open a news app, I'm hearing about some prediction. Some organization is predicting how things are really going to change. To be honest, I don't think that anybody knows what's really going to happen. Everybody's putting in their best, and the way I structured this conversation, I'm not an expert on on COVID or what is really going to happen, but I love to kind of read about what are the trends that are impacting specifically the future of work. What is really going to happen with work, workplace, and workforce? I think that those are the three things that really are of my interest, and we're going to do this as a conversation. So I just want to share some of my thinking, what I have collected. In terms of trends, and then we will open it up for questions. Love to answer any questions that you have. But it is just not about how the world is really going to change. I'm also going to really share my own personal experience on how I have dealt with change when I was faced with it. So let's dive into this. I'm going to begin with this particular chart. This is the latest chart that was released by IMF. It was released in June, and it really talks about what is the economic outlook. And as you can see, for FY20 across the world, all numbers are trending down. With overall, it's minus 4.9. You look at US -8, Europe 10.2, Latin America 9.4. You look across the screen, you'll pretty much see that everything is really trending down. And obviously, there is a prediction that we will try to accelerate this in 21, but 21 seems a really long way away from where I sit today. This particular chart really talks about beginning of April, and this is the net change in jobs, and this is specifically for US. But I'm very confident that if you were to pull this particular chart for any country or any region, it is going to look the same. Just look at April. How many jobs were reduced? And look at some of the industry segments that have been impacted. Specifically leisure and hospitality, like the hotel, basically the hotel industry. Look at education, retail. You can keep looking at this particular list. So there's a huge impact. I think which the people who are experiencing this are specifically in the middle income and the lower income groups. And I think that divide, and that is something, because we are so focused on eradication of poverty. That is something that we are seeing as a major issue, because as you can see, for some of the jobs which are possibly higher end, you can always, using technology, you can work from home. Like I am working from home, like I said, for the last 5 months, but then there are several who cannot actually. Their livelihood depends on really being in the restaurant or in the grocery or in the health, in the hospital. So to me, I think this is a major challenge that we will have to really tackle. But at the same time, I don't have some of the other charts because I didn't want to bore you with numbers. But if you look at some of the other charts, obviously the government is really stepping in. If you look at the US, they've already pumped in about $3 trillion, and they're really talking about another 1 to 3 trillion. They haven't yet reached agreement, but they're really talking about high numbers. So the government is stepping in. But as some of you, who are possibly interested in economics, you would know that they may put the money in now, but then they're actually adding deficit. So this is a longer term issue. But at this point in time, we need to really step in and do something so that we are able to kind of manage not only the safety of the people, but also look at the economic side of it. So that's where we are. So this is definitely a crisis which possibly we've never seen in the past. But while the current crisis has put a spotlight, but I think from my perspective, we were already in the middle of a major change. If you have been really tracking for the last 4 or 5 years, I think there's been so much conversation about AI, about robotics, about how things are going to change. And I think that is something that we are already in the middle of. So what I thought I will do is, there's a gloom and doom situation because of COVID, but at the same time, things are going to get back to normal. But maybe I can share some of these changes that we are already in the middle of, and then how do we really deal with some of these changes. So let me begin with this. I'm assuming that you are aware of the different industrial revolutions, the first one, the second, and the third. So we're right now, we are kind of transitioning between what is known as a third industrial revolution into the fourth industrial revolution. So what's changing? And as you can see, this is actually taken from a very good colleague, a friend, Heather McGowan. She runs this website, so it's here. I will share the presentation later on, so you can actually look at go to the website and hear her out. So I've picked some of this from her research. So what is changing? So in terms of innovation, look at technology. I think internet, computers, mobile, all of that is what we are experiencing right now. But what is really going to come is this whole merging of your digital, physical, and the biological systems. In fact, just yesterday, I was looking at this new product, which, it's supposed to help you focus better, apparently. I don't know, I haven't bought it yet, but it's like a band that you really put in. It's like a magnetic band that you put on your head, and apparently it really helps you focus better. You're really talking about wearable technology. I'm sure a lot of you are reading about it. You can actually put things on your skin. So that's a revolution that is in the making right now. With every change, there is always going to be displacement, which basically means that in terms of work, the work is really going to change. So in the third industrial revolution, the routine manual labor was changed, right? There was a huge displacement of people who were actually doing manual work because machines came in. What we are actually going to see as we really move forward is even the cognitive work, which is not basically the manual labor. But I think when I say cognitive work, this could be people who are doing accounting. This could be people even in the stock market. You can think of several jobs that possibly are going to get displaced because machines or algorithms or AI is going to do this. You don't need people to actually do this. There's so much of technology that is coming in, which will displace even people who are doing the thinking, because the machines are going to do the thinking. But having said that, what's going to drive the competitive advantage? It is going to be not just the specific expertise, but it is going to be the agility, the adaptability, ability to learn. It's going to be the purpose. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in the subsequent slides. Education. I think this is a very, very important part of this conversation, and I'm going to share some more in the coming slides about how the education and training is going to really change from ending your education at a certain point to moving to a lifelong learning and adaptation. I think that's a big shift, and I would strongly encourage everybody who's on this call today to pay attention to this particular area. Now, one is the change, but more importantly, actually the velocity of change. I think the pace at which the change is happening. So like this particular chart, and I'll just take a minute to kind of explain this particular chart. If you see on the vertical axis, you got the whole velocity of change, and then you got on the horizontal axis the time, and then there are several indicators. So if you look at the steam engine was introduced in 1750. The life expectancy at that point in time was 37 years. And just look at that particular track. So from 37 years, the life expectancy now is about 90 years, or it is going to be 90 years when you reach by 2050. So when you're seeing what is known as a paradigm shift, typically, it's about 2.5 lifetimes before the next paradigm shift would be experienced. But then as you really move forward, things are changing so fast that it does not take so long. So I think, things are changing by the hour right now. Now, the question is, when things are changing so fast, how do we change as human beings? Of course, new technology is coming in. So look at this, from internet to mobile to Internet of Things to AI and autonomous vehicles. And now we're really talking about the cyber and the physical convergence. That, basically to say that how something which is in the internet and the physical is really going to change. And one of these case studies that I was actually reading, and it is still in a pilot phase, but this is this whole technology where, of course, India is the hub for offshoring and outsourcing, but it is still on using technology. But there is this new technology that is really coming in where, you need people in warehouses. Think about an Amazon warehouse in the US, and then there were this big robot. If you've seen the movie Avatar, you see that somebody is going into these big machines and driving them. But I think this new technology is where you can actually be in India. So you can be in your home, you'll possibly have a special chair, and you sit in this particular chair, and then you're controlling this robot, which is actually sitting, which is possibly in a warehouse. And that's what it really talks about, the cyber and the physical convergence, which basically means that you can do a whole lot of work sitting in a remote area, and even things like lifting things and doing some dangerous stuff which requires physical presence. So that's what they're really talking about in the cyber physical convergence. So that's the pace of change. Now, what has it got to do with us? Why should we be worried about the pace of change? And here is a chart that is really trying to really explain that. So as things change, and this is a slightly different view, I think I was talking about the different revolutions, and this is another way of really looking at this. So if you really look back millions of years back, we were hunters and gatherers. I think that is what we were doing. We were hunting, gathering, and then we were feeding ourselves, and which is like millions of years back. And the talent required at that point in time was you needed strength and you needed speed, because you needed to be strong so that you can survive, and you needed the speed to run because if there's an animal coming behind you, you needed to survive. And then the tools that were developed were to really build efficiency of labor. Then we move into the agriculture era. Then we moved into the industrial era. But as things change in these eras, it's also about our mental models, right? In terms of what we think is our mental model. And I remember this one very interesting story which was told to me by my father-in-law. He's no more, God bless his soul. So he told me this story that when they introduced, he used to work for the government of India. So when they introduced email, right? When they introduced computer. So his boss, like he was not used to using emails and computers. So he would get files and he would kind of make notations on the file, and he was used to doing that. But of course, the computerization happened and the machines came in. And after some time, they were like, people were very skeptical that, possibly he's not going to take the computer or he's going to retire, but, he was still working. And at some point, somebody asked him, so how are you doing this? Then he said, you know what, here's this, my assistant. Every day he prints everything and he gives me the files. I go back and I make the notation and I give it back to him and he goes and enters into the system. I'm not touching this computer. That was his response. Now, to me, that's a classic example of how you can actually bring in technology, you can bring in change, but there's something about our mental models. Are we changing our mental models, or how fast can we change our mental models? And this is what this chart is really trying to say, that in terms of advancement in technology, we are almost at the end of this information era. We're getting into this whole augmented era, as this research paper is really talking about. But our mental models are still not catching up, because it takes time for us to really catch up with what is happening. And this, I think, is a very, very important shift that we all need to really be thinking about, because this is what is going to really change how we get employed, and in terms of so many aspects of talent. And being in human resources, this is an area that really fascinates me. And as you can see, if you look at the center, the line which talks about talent, from strength and speed to know-how to efficiency to acquired knowledge. So right now, we're really talking about the talent differentiator is the knowledge that you acquire and the skills that you can really build for yourself. But as you move into the next phase, it is going to be creative agility and adaptability. So we'll talk a little bit about that in this slide. And this is the last, in terms of the framework. And then, maybe we'll shift gears to see, okay, how do we deal with this situation? So if you really look at the previous 3 slides that I really spoke about, now, what does it mean from a work perspective? How is work going to change? And then how do we, in terms of, and this has also got to do with education and in terms of work, how do we deal with this? So if you look at the top left, that's the old model, where you go into college, you study till about 30 years, then you get out, you get your master's, you get your PhDs, whatever is the education, you join work, and then it's almost like, hire to retire, like it's like lifelong employment. I'm not saying that we are there right now. I'm really talking about this old model where you come in, you go in and you work and then you retire. That's about it. I think at least I know several of, my uncles and, people that I know who just work for one organization. They went in and then they retired from that organization. They get a golden watch and then they retire from that organization. You go into a bank or you go into a government job, huge value. If you really think about the generation which was just before me or my parents. So that was, how work was being done. And I think even now, in lot of economies today, that's the motto. You go in, you get educated, you get out and you just work and then you retire. And then, of course, there's this whole idea of life expectancy, because if you're going to live longer, then what are you really going to do after retirement? So that's a whole different conversation. But then I think in the recent past, people have realized that this model, the old model, is not going to work. So then came in, okay, you go in, you do your initial education, you then go and work for a couple of years, and then maybe you go for a 3-month executive course, or you do like a 1-year course, and then you retool yourself, you reskill yourself, and then you go back and do something else. And to me, I think the reason, based on this research, this is an emerging faulty logic in the model is, basically the pace of change is so fast at this particular point in time that even this model is not sustainable. It's not that you can go in, you work for like 10, 15 years, and then you do some retraining in the organization, and then you come out, because that's what is happening in several corporates right now. There are training organizations within the corporates who will have these skill building training programs or the leadership training programs. You go on 6 months, maybe 1 year to get retrained. But I think the new model, which I think, and I firmly believe in this, is what is the model, which is what is known as the learning agility. That there is no end to learning. You go in and you keep learning, and you see this is a depiction, of course, for visualizing this, that you go in and you keep learning, and then you engage, and then you recondition. You keep going in to see what's happening, what's going to change in terms of the work, what's changing in terms of the workforce, and what's going to change in terms of the workplace. So you keep adapting. And to me, this is a very different way of learning. So for all of you who are getting into college, assuming that you'll complete after 2 years and you'll get out and you'll start minting money, I wish you all the best, and I hope that you will mint money. But if you really want to continue to mint money till the time that you retire, I think you need to start develop that ability to learn continuously. I think use the next 2 years to learn how to learn, because that possibly is going to really serve you as you get into the workforce and you get into real life, as I tell my kids. So that's apart from a concept perspective. Of course, what COVID has done is that it has, like I said, it has put a spotlight. It has accelerated all of these things. So we need to, if we were thinking that some of these change, like AI or computerization or offshoring, different organizations were thinking about these things in the next 2 years, 5 years, it has just accelerated the whole thing, because we have to do it now, actually. So what do we do about it? So obviously, I've shared a bunch of models, and I've shared some gloomy story in terms of what's happening with COVID. So, so what do we do about it? So how do we deal with all that is really coming our way, and especially when we're starting? So I think, here's where I want to share my own personal experience, because I'm a firm believer that, the best story that you can tell is your story. And, you need to also learn from the story. So I've been very, very fortunate to really work with great people, great organizations. And, there's one thing that, when I think about what has helped me progress in my career journey, is curiosity. I've always been very, very curious about how things work. I think, one of my hidden talents is, I'm the handyman of the home, actually. And it has served me very, very well in the US, because it's very difficult to get an electrician here. So I have become an electrician. I'm a gardener. I'm a carpenter. So I do everything. But it also serves me well, because that is something that I really like. So number one, be curious. Always be on the lookout. It's a really great piece of art that I picked up in one of the books that I was reading. What does curiosity mean? Curiosity is just not about going, and of course, you need to learn, but it is about, once you gain the new knowledge, you need to test, you need to try, you need to experiment, because you need to develop that particular skill. It is just not about what you know, but it's about what you do. And I think it is just not about what you do, but how much you can actually share. Because the more you share, I think the more you're actually going to build the skill for yourself. And obviously, whoever you're sharing with, you're possibly also going to learn from them. So this whole aspect of curiosity I think this is something that I do. So when Alpa reached out to me, I got this email. I said, okay, fine, I will do this session. Originally, this was supposed to be later in the day, and I said my only request was if you can do it 10:30 so that I can still be awake. But like for me, I love doing this. I speak in different conferences. I write, but to me, the whole intent is to really learn new things and try and see how I can apply, and then share what lessons that I have learned. Because to me, this is an important part of growing up in terms of not only age, but in terms of growing between your years. The second, I think, important concept is your circle of control. I think a lot of conversations that I've had with the teams that I have led, or with my kids, my family, is about when things are not going your way. I think a lot of times it causes a lot of stress. It causes a lot of anxiety. So this whole concept, I picked this from the 7 Habits from Stephen Covey. If you have not read the book, please read the book. It's a timeless classic, and I think it's a slight adaptation to his concept of the circle of influence. Now it is also the circle of control. So in very, very simple terms, I think the way I look at life is, what's the circle of my control, which basically means that what can I control today, here and now? What is it that I can control? And that is something that I really, really focus on. And then, of course, comes the circle of influence, which means maybe I don't control it, but I can influence it. And then there is this whole circle of concern. And then, of course, there are things that I really don't care about. I just remembered this incident where somebody was really talking to me. This is a husband and a wife, and I'm sure you may have heard about this, but I think it is very, very relevant to this conversation. So this husband and a wife, and the friend comes in and he says, "Hey, you look like a happy couple. You never fight. Like, what's the secret of your happiness? Like, you don't fight at all. Like, ideal couple." He said, "Oh, it's very, very simple. All the big decisions I take care, and all the small trivial decisions my wife takes. And I think that's how we have had, that's our deal." He said, "Fantastic. So can you just tell me what kind of decisions you take and what she takes?" He said, all the decisions about what's happening with between India and Pakistan, what's happening with global warming, all of those big conversations, I make all the decisions. And all the other things like, what are we going to cook, and what car we're going to buy, which movie we are going to go, all of those decisions my wife takes. So I thought it was really relevant that, to really bring that up here. But on a more serious note, here is a depiction of what this chart actually means for you. And I firmly believe in this, and I keep telling in my kids that you need to spend most of your energy in the innermost circle, which is what you can control. You can control your thoughts, you can control your actions, you can control your attitude, you can control your work ethic. I think you need to spend a majority of your time and energy on the things that you can control. Once you can actually do that, then you will see that your circle of influence will keep expanding. And then, of course, there are going to be a whole lot of things which will concern you. But I think just finding that right balance. And I'm not saying that, things that are in the circle 3 that you really don't care about, and, you just forget about it. But don't let that influence you. That's the point number 2. The third is about looking at your life with a compass and not a stopwatch. And this to me is from a career management perspective, or when you really think about life. I've had several conversations when I was leading teams, large teams, where somebody would come in and say, what, I've been 2 years in this job and I haven't yet seen my next promotion, or stuff like that. I haven't seen my increment, or you're always measuring against a stopwatch. It's almost like there's a clock, and then you're really thinking about, okay, well, I haven't reached this milestone. I've reached X age, I haven't got married. I reached Y age, I haven't bought a house. So I think that there's a little bit of a mindset of that. But I think that you need to really think about what is your direction of travel? Once you're clear about the direction of travel, I think you need to keep walking in that direction. And you will possibly work for 45, 50 years of your life once you get out of college. There's going to be a lot of time for you to really work. So this is where let me talk to you about my own experience, how I started and what I have done. I pretty much started in 91 when I passed out of, in fact, I was doing work even before this. But in 91, when I passed out, I started with my own entrepreneurial venture. I'm from Hyderabad, and I did this for several years before I moved to a job, because this is something that I really wanted to do. And this is what the difference between the stopwatch and the compass that I said. Even though I had my own venture, but somehow I really wanted to be in the corporate world. So in 91, I got this opportunity with Latham India. It's a Tata Group company known for selling typewriters, and maybe some of you don't know what typewriters are, but I'm sure Rajesh will know what a typewriter is. So this company was very popular for selling typewriters, but I was in a division selling fax machines. So I joined them in 95. I loved sales. Then in 97, I moved to HCL Office Automation, selling photocopies. And again, this was also part of, I'll connect it back to the curiosity angle of this. When I was selling fax machines, I knew very soon that in 95, the computer age, printers were coming in, computers were coming in. And I quickly realized that, for me to grow, I need to get out of this particular space, because if I remain in fax machines, then I'm not going to see the growth, because if that industry is not going to see the growth, I'm not going to see the growth. So at the right time, I moved to HCL. From HCL, I joined Motorola in 98. And this is where I learned about Six Sigma for the first time, Rajesh. I led several projects as a part of the Motorola team. And I worked there for about 2 years. And in 2000, I joined GE, where GE was just beginning its offshore center. And there I did operations, Six Sigma, and HR. But as you can see, the overall trend, I was constantly trying to, move from one corporate to another corporate, where, in terms of the learning. And GE at that particular point in time was known as the leadership factory, because GE was a place where you have so many leaders that have really come in. So when GE came knocking, I said, this is the place that I want to be. But more importantly, if you really look at the concept that I was talking about, lifelong learning. So I finished my BSc Electronics from Usmania in 91. In 97, I did my part-time MBA in marketing because I was very interested in sales. And when I started with HR, and HR was, I would say, almost like an accident. I'm not an HR professional. A lot of my friends from HCL and Motorola still get surprised when they see that I'm in HR. But I was a Six Sigma black belt supporting HR, and the organization wanted me to come in. But once I, saw the work, I realized that this is what I want to do. So I went back to college. So I did my postgraduate certificate from XLRI. This was the second batch of executive education. So as you can see, it is just not, I'm not preaching a model. I went back, and of course, in this time, I got married, I had kids, I moved. There's so many things that were happening, but I knew if I want to make progress, it was important for me to keep going back and retooling myself. So 2000 to 2008, I worked in GE. In 2008, I joined Lehman Brothers. Then I, of course, continued in HR. 2009 was in Target. And 2012 is when I joined the World Bank. And even right now, I completed my a course in design thinking, in applied design thinking, which I did about 2 years back. And right now I'm doing a certificate course in neuroeconomics from a college in Russia, because that's the only place where they're offering this on Coursera. If you know Coursera. Again, I think the idea of really showing this is, if you really want to make progress, you need to keep constantly learning about this. The other important thing that I want to actually share from my trajectory here is, is also connected to, the current pandemic. Of course, there's nothing that compares to the current pandemic, but I can tell you in my own way. I spoke about the fax machines. Once I quit, after 2 years, this company closed down because the whole business of fax machines was shut down. Similarly, Motorola, they were selling paging services, and we all know what happened to pagers. So I've seen all of these transitions, so to say. And then, of course, the biggest one for me was Lehman Brothers. I joined Lehman Brothers in May, and in September of 2008, the big recession happened and the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers happened. So there were times, all these three are specific times where I thought, what, my life is done, my career is done. But that's not the case. That is not the case. If you're constant, and Lehman, I remember, I think the day the bankruptcy was announced, exactly after 2 days, I got an offer from one of the large corporates where I had actually interviewed like 6 months back, and they just sent me an offer. So the point I'm really trying to make it is, of course, we are in a very, very difficult situation right now, but I think this will also pass. But what we cannot miss is making sure that we are constantly focusing on our own things, what we can control, like I said, so that our attitude, keep learning and making sure that we are ready when the boom happens. Then you should be the first person that a corporate is going to call. And the last thing, I think this is the last, but I think a very important thing and this is something that I picked up. This quote is from a lady called Debbie Williams, and it's so relevant. Anything that is worthwhile is going to take a long time, because today, and I think I deal with this situation with several people, including my own kids. Everybody needs a shortcut. So everybody wants a shortcut of making the millions or the lakhs. What is the fastest way of getting where somebody else is, right? There's so many stories. I also mentor a lot of startups. I'm part of several angel funds. And, when I'm talking to some of these CEOs of these startups, they're all really looking for, how can I exit and make my millions right away? But you look at some of the examples, it takes time. So you have to invest the time before you expect, some magic to happen. That does not mean magic doesn't happen, but it's very rare. It does happen, but it's very, very rare. But for the rest of us, if you really want something worthwhile, you have to really, really invest. And there's a very interesting model, and some of you may be aware of this, but this is the whole Japanese concept of Ikigai. If you haven't read about this, strongly encourage you to Google this and you read about this. It's a very, very simple concept. And Ikigai, it's a word, Japanese word. It simply means a reason for being. Basically, why are we here? And how to get there. And you'll see in this particular chart, there are several things here. The top circle is, what is it that you love doing? So if you only focus on what you love doing, then you will be delighted, you'll be very happy, but possibly you won't have money. Okay? Then you look at the one which is on the left side. What is it that you're really good at? Okay? So if you just focus on what you are good at, then of course you're going to be satisfied because you're doing things what you are good at. But then at some point you'll feel that it's useless to really do. Similarly, I think you can read the chart, but I think this is a very, very interesting concept. And if you really connect the dots, that all the things that I'm really talking about, if you really want to build a meaningful career, a meaningful life, you've got to find your Ikigai. In fact, there's a recent movie also that I saw on Netflix somewhere where they were talking about this. But if you really want to chart the path, then concepts like this are very, very helpful. But it is just not the concept. You have to actually implement the concepts, and it takes a lot of hard work. And the reason I'm really sharing this right now concept is also to connect with the future, because there are several jobs that exist today. When I was getting into the workforce, those jobs didn't exist actually. This whole thing about cybersecurity, there was no concept of cybersecurity when I came in to the workforce. Today, there are several of my friends who are bloggers, they are ghost writers, there are vloggers. I think All of these things never existed actually. So to me, if you really look at, I pulled this from a very recent study that was done by HBR, and look at this. If you look at the chart which is on the left hand side, these are the 21 HR jobs of the future. These jobs don't exist. So what I mean by that is don't exist in generally. There are some companies who have these jobs. That's the reason these jobs are here. But if you really want to get here, you got to go to this particular slide and really think about this particular the orange pinkish circle about what the world needs. You need to constantly look out for what does the world need, and then try and see how does that fit with everything else that you are doing. So look at some of the jobs here. The chatbot and human facilitator. This job doesn't exist today, but I can tell you as somebody who has implemented a prototype. So we are going to implement a chatbot in the organization, but these chatbots are robots, right? They're programs, they're software programs, but they need coaching. Similarly, gig economy manager, distraction prevention coach. That's the one that I really like. So in the future, you'll possibly have people whose job is to try and see how people are not distracted. It may not seem like a big thing, but I don't know if you read the research around this. I think we are so distracted all the time with all of these devices, the phone devices that we have. We're like so constantly distracted. So how can you do any meaningful work if you're going to be constantly distracted by the pings that you get on your phone? So to me, it is just to tell you that if you don't see a job today, does not mean that job doesn't exist tomorrow, but you got to watch out for some of these things. And then what you see on the right is this concept of moving from hierarchy to wirearchy. But basically what this really means is that in today's world, if you really get into work, there is a hierarchy, right? There's going to be a CEO, and then there's going to be a worker, and there are all these levels in between. But as you move forward, and this transition I'm seeing in my workplace today, and I've seen this in other workplaces too, the hierarchy is not going to matter anymore as we really move forward. What is really going to matter is who is creating value in the hierarchy. And sometimes that value is getting created 2 levels down in the hierarchy. It's not because you're a director or you're a VP. It is because you are the person who's actually creating value for the organization. In some cases, there's a lot of case studies, and that's where the value is. And that's one part of it. The second part is who has the knowledge, who are the people that other people trust, who has the credibility, and then who is somebody who can really focus on results. So to me, those are the things that are really going to matter as you really move forward, in terms of education. And these are some very, very interesting concepts, but it is just to give you a flavor of what's going to come actually as we move into the future. So that was my last slide. And if you don't take anything from this particular talk, just remember these 4 things is what I would say. We are in a very difficult situation. This virus and this whole crisis is testing all of us, but I'm very, very confident that we will get out of this. It has happened in the past. I'm sure it will happen, but there are things beyond just this pandemic that are going to really hit us very, very hard. And if we want to really focus, just these 4 things, if you can really remember: be curious, focus on things that you can control, look at the compass, not a stopwatch, and then if you want to create something worthwhile, please expect it is really going to take time. That's all I had. Thank you so much, Rajesh and the team, for inviting me. It's been a great honor.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I think I hope, if nothing else, we surely have learned a lot, and I hope the students understand the depth of what you're coming from. Okay, that's very important, because this is again, out of pure experience that you've talked, and that you've shared. And I hope, if I'm sure you would be more than happy to share those slides with the students.
I will.
Yeah, and because I think some of this needs them to have a relook at what you're saying, and thankfully this is recorded, and I hope we would want them to understand the depth of what you're trying to say here, because please understand these are very, very important changes that you can expect in the coming future. Okay, and as I said yesterday, also, these 2 years you can make all the mistakes that you want right now. Okay, so guys, go ahead, learn. And we have a very simple concept, Sanjeev, that we work around, which is learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we are very clear on that aspect too. So we want our students to understand uh, multiple thought processes. All right, and that's something that I think they would have experienced in the last day and a half already. Okay, so they're probably set to understand what kind of stuff is coming to to them, and uh, anybody, as I said even yesterday, please ask questions. We have Sanjeev before he dozes off today. Let's pick his brain on some of these aspects that you may have. So you could probably send your questions on a chat on the chat box, and we could take them up. Or and if somebody else has a direct question to ask, to raise the hand, we would probably unmute you and let you. So students, all yours. You can ask whatever you feel like.
If the question comes up, I would like to ask one question. That how do you keep a track and how do you update yourself in the changing financial trends in industry? Because it's so much happening around the world, around the sectors, and being a top leader in the world, or a sector in the world, how do you manage to maintain the balance and inform people around and make the necessary changes in the system?
Alpa, that's a great question, and to me, you're right. I think every day, and I think there was a recent study that I had done, research that I had read. The amount of data that is getting created today, it is overwhelming. I think so. To me, the way I do it is, be very clear about what are the things that I'm really focused on. And to me, like I said, my focus is on how can we be better selves of ourselves. How can we be better today from what we were yesterday? And basically talking about HR, talking about technology, talking about agility, or the whole concept of transformation. And then the most important part is the future of work. To me, I think those are the areas that are interest to me, and that's where I put the energy. So if you really look back on the slide on Ikigai, it's basically that's the thing that I love. That's the area that I really focus on, and that's what really drives me to constantly, keep learning and then sharing. But there are several areas where I'm not an expert. Like I'm not an expert on sports. I have my other friends who are expert on sports. There are other people who are expert in other things. That's the interest that they have. So to me, that's the way I keep looking at some of these things. And then some stuff, I look at what is the trend. So to me, it's very important that you read some of the thinkers. There are some of the people out there, and you read, you take your time, and maybe I did not mention that, but reading to me is very, very important. I think at any given point in time, I can show right now, but if I was on my phone, I would have shown you. At any given point in time, I'm reading like 2 or 3 books at the same time. I've picked up that habit over the last many, many years. And I read about a whole lot of subjects. And this wirearchy, this concept that I really spoke about, this is a paper that I started reading just yesterday. So to me, you need to first be very clear about what is it that you're really interested in, and then try and develop that particular interest, and then read about the things that are happening. And then you will learn very soon that what are the kind of things that you get attracted towards, and then start building your expertise around that.
Excellent. Thank you. Students, do we have any questions? So I have one more question on a students group. It says, how do you keep yourself shield yourself from cyber attack? Because that's an important concern of the matter, in being the sector you're working in. So how do you? I would like to take you this question in terms of protecting yourself from cyber attack.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm an expert to really talk about that, but I can tell you what I do. I make sure that I have McAfee in my system. I make sure that I'm very careful that I don't open the links that I should not be opening. So some of the things that, the basic common sense things, I would say, are very, very important in terms of cybersecurity. But I do think it is very, very important. Don't be loose about your Aadhaar card number, or, when people call, don't give your password. I think these are the things that are very, very important. But make sure that you have the right software. I think, a lot of people go for pirated softwares, and, all the things that people do to kind of save a dollar here, or, some money here. But I think you pay a much bigger price.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Sir?
So yeah, I think we have another question from Aniket, which says, how's the role of HR? No, rather, how will the role of HR change after COVID-19?
Dramatically. I think it's a great question, and I love that particular question. So, and I can tell you right now, I am in middle of this pandemic. So as a part of the HR team, the role of HR is dramatically changing. What HR is really expected to do is changing from what it was in the past. So three areas that I would say HR will be expected to play a much, much bigger role. The first one is employee well-being. I think this whole concept that we need to really focus on the well-being of the employees was, pretty much at the back burner. Of course, HR used to play a little bit of a role, and then different organizations had, maybe health teams or the health department, but it was never in the forefront. But I think HR will need to play a much bigger role in this whole concept of, mental health, the overall well-being of your employees, because at the end of the day, I can tell you from a World Bank perspective, what we have realized is we are a knowledge organization. We're not manufacturing computers, or we're not manufacturing cars. So we're a knowledge organization. So for us, our people are the biggest asset. And if we really don't take care of our people, then we cannot survive. We are no longer going to be relevant. So the first one is, the role of HR is going to change from an employee well-being perspective. The second, I think, is the expectation of being agile and responsive. I think the policies, and when I say agile and responsive, I mean from a policy perspective. If you really think about the HR function, even not in, I don't want to say the past, but even in the recent, I think most of the HR teams are seen like teams that are policing you, they're like more of control. Like, here is the policy, you got to follow the policy. That's how the perception of HR is. But I don't think that is going to really work any longer. In fact, in the last 3 months, we have been so responsive. We have changed so many of our policies, whether it is a leave policy, whether it is a policy of insurance, benefits, how we're going to do performance evaluation, how we're really going to do promotions. I think a whole lot of these policies need to be changed. So I think this whole thing about agility and responsiveness. And the last very important thing is, how do you really think about the future? How do you make sure that your organization is ready for the future? Because the things are changing so fast. What skills are going to be required? So how do you then work with your business leaders to anticipate what is going to change in the next 3 years to 5 years, or in the next 1 year to 2 years? And then how do you really organize the workforce? So it is just not about hiring, but how do you really organize the workforce in a combination of your own staff, maybe some contractors, maybe some consultants. So how do you really set up a team? So how do you move from just managing your employees in the organization to then managing a high performing unit, or a team that is supposed to really deliver, which is not something that, HR people do normally. So I think those three, at least to me, are going to be major shifts in terms of what HR is really going to do.
On the same lines, I mean, especially on the productivity aspect of it, I'm sure nobody wants a good employee to leave, right? I mean, especially, but in times like these, when you have a crisis like this, I mean, every organization will look at cutting costs, right? And they would also want to, as you said, become more efficient. And that's when they start looking at the funnel and say, what, I think we could have ABCD, go on a whatever, on a leave, or they could be allowed to, move on. So how would you, what kind of suggestion would you have for companies which are probably going through that kind of a mindset where there's and they may be people who have probably served the organization for quite some time, but in today's uh, times, when an organization looks at somebody and says, but yeah, I mean, I could probably not do with this person. I mean, I could
Yeah.
probably let 10% of my workforce go. So how do you think your suggestion or your ideas on something like that?
No, that's a great question, Rajesh. I think I'll tell you one example. When 2009, when the whole crisis happened, and I think a lot of people were letting go of people.
Yeah.
And I was working for Target at that particular point in time, and Target also had to, because this was the first time in the history of Target of 100 years that they did what is known as a reduction in force, like retrenching people. So we retrenched 600 people, and it was so traumatic for the organization. But out of the 600, so it is not like 600 people got affected. I think we had about 200 open positions that we were going to hire. We said we're not going to hire those people, and maybe about 400 people globally were asked to go. But it is about the care and the way we really did it, the amount of effort that was really put in. So, some of this is reality, because when, if your business has to survive, then you have to reduce costs. But how you do it is very, very important. It's the transparency of how you really do the whole thing, and being very fair and being human about it. So like in the US, I don't know how many of you are aware, but in the US, you don't need to give like 2 months, 3 months of notice period. 15 days and a month is like a luxury, but 15 days and but we give 6 months of pay to everybody, including benefits, including insurance and everything. We did counseling sessions for people who were left behind. So I'm just giving an example.
Right.
But more importantly, I think in today's world, future employees are looking for organizations of how they're treating their current employees.
Yeah.
And it makes a big difference, okay? And a lot of other organizations let go of their people, some of their top players. In fact, I was hired in Target when this whole crisis was happening. So we actually hired good people, even though, of course, there was a recession, but we invested. And to me, it went a very, very long way for Target. And if you really look at the stock price of Target and the way Target is doing today, it's doing really, really well. But if you really ask me, all of this investment in positioning yourself as an organization that really cares is really important. And I think that is what is really going to happen today. To be honest, even for the World Bank, what we have done over the last several months, like in March, when this whole thing happened, I think a week after that, I began as a part of my role to proactively planning for how we're really going to manage the workforce. So we did a couple of things. So one of the things that we did was, because we had so many offers that we had already given to people who were supposed to join, right? Now everything is in a lockdown and we're a global organization. So we quickly came up with a virtual onboarding module, and we got all of these people onboarded. Then this whole question of benefits and everything, but we really took care of that. In terms of hiring, we have a very massive plan as an organization to deliver, based on our client countries, which means that we need to really hire these people. In the last quarter of our financial year is from July to June. So April, May, and June is our Q4. In middle of the pandemic, we've done our highest number of hires. We've hired about, almost 1.5 times more than what we were hiring in the previous quarters. Okay. But all of this is just as an example. So for these organizations, I think you got to really think about balancing, surviving versus surviving in the future. I think that balance, and it's going to be very different for different organizations. But to me, that's what I would think organizations need to really think about.
Thanks. I think we have a couple of more questions. Momita asking, hi Momita, good to see you from Calcutta all the way. She's in Calcutta, by the way. So yeah. So hello sir, what is the opportunity that you think about? The question is, what opportunities HR perspective? What are the kind of
Yeah.
opportunities that she thinks can?
Yeah, I'm seeing the questions. So there are a couple of questions. So Aditya is also asking this question about how do you keep track of the future changes that will affect your career? What quality? So I'm going to combine a few of these questions and just share my own perspective. In terms of tracking the future changes, and then the qualities that you need to really continue in an organization for a longer period of time after the pandemic. So to me, I think this whole concept of staying in an organization for a longer period of time, personally, I really don't subscribe to this particular notion that we need to be in the organization. And of course, I worked in organizations like this is eight years here. I worked for 8 years in GE, but let me tell you, in the 8 years, I have done very different roles. So I changed my roles 4 times. So I'm not doing the same thing for which I was really hired, and I showed you my career trajectory. If I don't see that I'm really going to grow in the organization, or I'm not going to add value, or if the organization or that role is not going to add value, I move on. Because to me, I think there are enough good organizations and there are enough good people. So if you see in my track, you'll find that, for HCL and in Lehman, of course, I had an opportunity to stay, but I just moved on. So the point I'm really trying to make here is it has to be about what are you learning? It is not about the time. And I think this is a very important thing that I was talking about, not a stopwatch, but a compass. If you are, working in a role where you're hating going into office every day, but you're doing it because you're getting the money, then I would actually quit. And there are so many examples. In one of my jobs, I actually left a lot of money on the table, which they were offering me to stay for 1 year, and they would have given me a whole lot of money, which I would have possibly taken 5 years to save that much money. But to me, I was very clear that if I'm not learning anything, and if I'm not enjoying, then I would rather not work there. So I think that's the answer to say that you need to have confidence in yourself. You need to have the right skills. And if you're delivering value, trust me, no organizations would want to let you go. They would want to keep you there. So that's what I would say, Bhavna, to your question. And, in terms of tracking, I would say read. That's what I would say. Keep your eyes and ears open. Keep talking to people. You are an average of the 5 people that you are with. I think that's a simple, Will Smith said it, but I think that's very important. So who are you actually, conversing with? Who are your friends? It's that's how you really track the future, because you need to work, be with people who are also thinking about the future, or you be the person who's thinking about the future. So I think, to me, that's how I keep track of what is happening. Now, what opportunities are going to come up after the pandemic? Very hard, I would say. I think I shared a chart talking about what kind of jobs are really going to come in. But please know, I think these jobs that are getting reduced today, they are going to come back. But some of them are going to come back in a very different way. They're not going to be the same jobs. I think the jobs are going to change dramatically. And to me, some of those changes, I think it's very difficult to predict at this point in time. But I think, if you really keep yourself updated in terms of the skills, I think there's plenty of opportunity that is really going to come in. I think Deepik also had a question that how do you overcome challenges and changes during the pandemic? Go back to the circle of control. I think there's a whole lot of things that are changing. Please focus on the things that you can control. And be in the present, be in the now, because there are things that you cannot control. Don't worry about them. So I'm going to give you like this US example. There's a lot of conversation about the election that is going to come. I talk about it, but I don't let that affect me. I want to focus on the things that I want to focus on, because I want to focus on myself. There's a whole world out there. There's plenty of things that are happening. I'm not bothered about that. I want to really focus on things that I can really control. So to me, that's my message to you in terms of Deepika. Stay focused on what you can control.
Wonderful. Guys, any more questions before I let Sanjeev go to? I mean, he's had a long day, and I'm sure he needs his rest. So, guys, anything else? Any other questions? Great. I think I am sure I can say thank you to you, Sanjeev. Finally, Sanjeev,
Sure.
it was absolute pleasure. Okay, I think uh, uh, I'm sure they're silent because they're probably still soaking in what you've said. All right, I'm sure the next time you're on, which I hope you would be obliged, you will oblige us with in the near future whenever we get to connect again. And if you do ever travel to India, do let us know. We would love to host you at Vidyalankar. All right.
Sure.
So I'm hoping if you are in India, if you have family, as you said, if you're visiting them, just let us know sometime in advance so we can make all the arrangements for you to be at our campus. We would love to have you, and that we give them a one-to-one opportunity to interact with you. All right, and of course, I'm sure we will all stay connected.
Sure.
We look forward to more ideas and as things progress. And I could only thank you as much as I'm sure all the students would want to. And thank you for the time. It was an absolute pleasure having you on.
No, it's a pleasure, Rajesh, and all the very best to all the students. And Alpa, I'll send this presentation to you. You can share it with the students.
Yes, sir. Thank you
Thank-
so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev.
Thank you, Sanjeev.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.